Welcome back to Within Tolerance Podcast, a podcast for machinists by a machinist. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson from Protein Machining, and this week I'm joined by Ed Kramer of EFK3 Ventures. Welcome, Ed.
Hey, Dylan. Appreciate it. Really excited to be on the show.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I've been watching your Instagram for a long time and listening to your podcast for a while. So before we jump into your backstory, where can people find you online?
Yeah, Instagram is probably where I post most of the interesting stuff or the stuff that your audience would be interested in. That's eKramer3, or I'm sorry, at eKramer3 on Instagram, EKRAMER and the digit 3. That's pretty much it. Like, I don't have a website, personal or business at this time. It's that or email.
Awesome.
That's pretty much it. Yeah.
And then,
and
yeah,
the
I was going to say
podcast.
your podcast.
Yeah, I forgot about that. So I co-host the Digital Fabrication Experiment podcast with Winston Moy and Chris Lee. That's, I think, at Winston, I can't remember his Instagram. It's Winston Makes, I think, or at Winston Makes.
So Winston is Winston Makes, and Chris, I think, is Chris E. Lee or chrislee.design.
Yeah, Chris, that's it. And yeah, so we've been doing that for, I think we're on episode 67 now, and we do kind of every other week. It's been slipping lately, but yeah. And we started off, we'll kind of, as we cover my backstory, you'll kind of see some of that affected how the podcast evolved. We were all kind of hobbyist makers when we first started. Just, I think maybe Winston, we all kind of came from a 3D printing background and then got hobby CNC machines, and now we all are involved in manufacturing and industrial machine, or have access to industrial machines on a daily basis. And none of us started in manufacturing. We're all from outside. So it's sometimes, for somebody that listens to your, the experienced machinists and manufacturing engineers that listen to your podcast get a chuckle, I think, out of some of our early episodes.
Yeah, but it's a nice different viewpoint. I've been listening to DFX since, I don't know, the 34th episode. And it's always really cool to see your trade viewed from the outside. And especially since you guys have grown up through hobby machines into industrial equipment, it's been really interesting seeing how you come across very common problems that we all have in machining and then tackle them in your own way because of your own experience.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You kind of mentioned Instagram. To me, getting on Instagram, of all the things I did when I first got into digital fabrication and machining, that was probably it was kind of accidental. I didn't open my Instagram account with the intention of posting to the world my CNC foibles. I just had some friends at work that were I was always telling them or bringing stuff in that I was making on my little machines, and they're like, "How are you doing that?" They were trying to understand more about it. They also knew about 3D printing, but like me, didn't really know anything about CNC. And so I was thinking my audience or my follower list would maybe be 12 people that I knew, and mom. But yeah, so that's kind of getting on Instagram was a huge accelerator, learning more about manufacturing and the getting better acquainted with the community of talented people out there. Everyone is it's such a great community because so many online communities are YouTube comments, they're just terrible, right? But I think the instant machinist community is still very friendly and open and kind of true. I don't know. Everyone wants to help where they can, right? And everyone I think appreciates seeing the kind of cool stuff that goes on in manufacturing, even when it's little stuff in my garage or stuff going on at SpaceX. It's really cool.
Yeah. Well, and you do a great job of, keeping people updated, and you produce a lot of really good content.
Well,
so and clearly you've got a ton of followers because of it. So it's awesome to see.
Yeah, but you have my favorite podcast. So.
Well, I appreciate it.
Or Within Tolerance, I'd say, of course, Business and Machining, Lathe Night, when they were, I don't know if they're still, I've kind of fallen behind. It's weird because when the COVID stuff, and even for me, before that, I was already kind of working from home right before COVID started anyway, because this is what I do now. And I realized, I didn't realize how much I missed out on my podcast routine, because I used to always listen to, I had about a 45-minute commute to work every day. And that was when I listened, to and from work. So when I listened to my podcast, or, work through my podcast queue. And then when I started working from home, it was like I started falling so far behind. So now it's nice. I've been catching up lately, listening in the shop now when I can. And there's like so many more good like machining focused podcasts than there were 2 years ago. So
totally.
thanks for starting with Intolerance. And the other one I love is Adam and Josh. What's the name of their podcast?
Precision Microcast. Yeah,
Precision Microcast. Yeah, I'm also one of my favorites.
Big fan of that one as well. They are both like, I always say, guests come on here, they're nerd out about machining, but like they take that to a whole nother level, and I learn so much every time they post an episode. So
yeah, exactly. That's what I like. I really take away from that one is hearing those. They're both I would say experts in precision or getting there for, in each of their areas of strength, right? And and most of what I pick up from that podcast is probably more than I'll ever be able to use, like in my environment. But yeah, it's just interesting to hear the kind of challenges, especially when they're dealing with like some crazy stuff that I hope I never have to deal with.
Yeah, seriously, their whole last episode about grinding, I was like, I don't have a grinder. I probably won't ever use this, but man, is it interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's jump back. How did you get into machining? Because you said, you were kind of showing your coworkers. What were you doing before, however much you want to share, but like, how did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, so I started as a baby. No, I'm just kidding. Like ever since I was a kid, though, I was always been interested in like mechanical and electronic stuff. When I went into university, I started off as a mechanical engineering student, but like by the end of the first semester, I was hooked on computer science. Like, because we had some computer classes that were just kind of prerequisite to some of the engineering stuff, and like for whatever reason, I got hooked on that and ended up spending most of my professional career in software engineering and enterprise architecture, like nowhere near manufacturing, even though the company I worked for did have a manufacturing branch. But if it wasn't a software issue, I really wasn't talking to that branch or that division much. And anyway, so I think around 2013, 2014, I kind of got sucked in by all the 3D printer hype and ended up buying a small 3D printer for the house. And that was like, to me, that was pretty amazing to be able to just model up an idea, kind of squirt the file over the printer and have it in my hands in a few hours. Like that kind of got me hooked on, the whole kind of workflow, right from CAD to design to having a physical. It was very different than software development because you work all day, you're creating stuff, but you never can see it, can't touch it, it just spits right in the cloud. But actually be able to make something tangible was pretty eye-opening to me. I still didn't really know anything about CNC, like lathes, or didn't even know they existed, right? Milling machines. I did know about lathes because my grandfather actually ran a machine shop from his house after he retired from his day career. He was
really?
He was actually like, he had his whole career was on the sales side in the oil industry. I think he worked for Baker Hughes. But when he retired, he basically became a tool and die guy for them, set up his own lathe at home and did a bunch of kind of interesting tooling that they needed, mainly downhole tooling. And so I remember as a kid, we weren't actually allowed to go in the shop. I was probably too young for it to be safe, but I always remember watching him, from the kind of the anteroom doing like turning little pieces of metal into like really beautiful stuff. I remember that experience as a kid, but that was it. Like I kind of didn't think much about it until I think probably around the time I got the printer. I was like just looking through YouTube and ran across this guy that was making this, he had this big rusty piece of steel and he was doing something on this machine that looked like what my grandfather had, and it was turning into this beautiful shiny part. And it turned out that was Adam Booth, A-Bomb 79.
Oh,
making
wow.
Making one of those huge motor shafts that he used to make, I think, before he quit his day job. And that, I got hooked. That was pretty cool. And I started looking around YouTube, very quickly found like John Saunders' channel and Grimsmo's channel. I think that was probably around 2015. And that's what kind of got me looking for something other than, the 3D printing was fun, but you could only make, PLA stuff, right? Plastic. I wanted to work with like wood, metal, pretty much any material I could think of. And so I could see like that's what these guys were doing, but they were using these big machines, right? I didn't really see that happening in the spare bedroom shop here. But then I saw, I think it was Bantam Tools. They had a little Kickstarter on YouTube, Kickstarter video, and they had this little like toaster oven size machine that was machining brass, I think, in the video. And I was like, okay, that's what I want. And that was like my first CNC machine. I think Bantam Tools. It was really designed to make PCB boards, but I made a few PCBs, but mostly used it for like making little aluminum parts and all kind of stuff. But that was my first time I ever touched a CNC machine.
Oh, wow.
I added a few more hobby machines here, including like the Pocket NC 5-axis desktop machine, which is, so I got my hands wet with, a little bit of 5-axis and 3+2 positional machining. And that's also about the time I switched over to Fusion. I won't tell you what I was using for for my CAD software back in the 3D printer days. It was not CAD software, but I was trying to use it as that.
Oh boy.
Yeah, it was like motion picture CGI type software with the plugin.
Interesting.
Yeah, it had a plugin that had some CAD-like features. It wasn't parametric, so it was actually Lightwave. I think NewTek Lightwave.
Oh, okay.
And and there's this plugin called LW CAD that gave you splines and a bunch of other stuff and let you dimension some stuff. And that, like, I used that for like the first couple of years I was playing around with 3D printing. Did kind of learn the basics of CAD, and then I think they had a coupon in there for Fusion, like free. It was already free, but it was like, ooh, coupon, you can use it for free. And that was a big switch for me too, like switching over to a real parametric CAD system. That kind of accelerated the process. And yeah, that's kind of, it was hobby machines up until last year where I ended up getting the Datron Neo. I did a little bit of commercial work on the hobby machines. I had like a couple of clients that had some recurring parts, some little tiny gears, Delrin gears I was making. So I got my feet wet kind of doing job shop work, but you would not have been able to make a living with those little hobby machines doing that kind of work very long. I think, you could potentially make your own product if you had the right product, like some sort of ECD or EDC product.
Yeah, because you had a spinner that you made quite a few of, didn't you?
Yeah, and that was my first. Yeah, that was actually the thing I was making with the Bantam and I had a Carbide 3D Nomad Pro here. That was like my second CNC machine. They had them right next to each other on the desk, and actually the spinners that was the thing I was using to learn Fusion. It was just I saw some spinner out on an ad or something. I said, let me see if I can. And that's a good thing to try to model, right? It had an interesting shape. And then kind of started iterating with that and ended up with my own design. I said, I wonder if I could make it. Like, it's time to learn the CAM part of Fusion, right? And that was like just my little study piece, right? To kind of learn. It was like my own tutorial, right? To learn Fusion. That and the Saunders videos and Lars training content, right? And I made one, brought it into work, and they're like, everyone wanted one. I was like, okay, I better figure out a way to make like a bunch of these efficiently. And so that's when I started learning about fixturing and all that kind of stuff. So it was pretty good. I mean, it's a weird way to get into, kind of what I do now. But yeah, I mean, as far as, process and everything, you learn it on a small scale, even with the hobby machines. But,
yeah, definitely. Well, and like, I think that if anybody listening, I would guess that 70 or 80% of them 3 or 4 years ago probably had designed at least a spinner. Anybody who was in manufacturing at that point was looking at those and like, well, I can make that. Why not? Like, so that's pretty cool.
I don't think my design ever got anywhere like as nice as the Grimsmo spinners that he was selling back when he was still working through the Rask Kickstarter pre-sale. But it was a good, it was actually the first product I ever sold, out into the world, right, to people I didn't know. And that was pretty good feeling. And that kind of got me thinking, I got these other product ideas. There's no way I can make one of these little machines. I should start looking at an industrial machine. And I probably started where everyone does when they start doing the research, looking at Tormach, and then kind of quickly realizing Tormach's probably not the machine I want for what I wanted to do. And then I think I looked at pretty closely at the small Haas CM1. And that whole time I'd been seeing Datron's post on Instagram, and It's like, that's really like, I liked how fast that machine was. I liked that you could have a like fourth axis on it, and that it was like small enough to fit in the house. And that was kind of like what got me really focused on that machine. And I was mostly interested in machining aluminum and Delrin, and I didn't really want to do steel or basically anything that needed flood coolant, just because I didn't want to deal with that in the house or in the garage. Yeah, that's kind of what got me looking at Neo in the first place. And about a year ago, I pulled the trigger on one, and that's what I have in my garage now. Like I said, my business plan was to, especially when I was trying to sell this to my wife, was, I had some product ideas, which I still do. Eventually I'll probably get around to them. But and I said, I'll take whatever odd jobs I can find for it too, right? Because I already had a couple of clients that I was doing work on the hobby machine that were interested in potentially scaling up to parts, something that would keep the Neo pretty busy, at least a couple of days a week. And the plan was never like to get a Neo and then become a Datron job shop, right? But that's pretty much where I'm at now. So that's like 99% of my work is for other people on that machine. And actually I love it. So I'll keep, I'll do that probably until I can figure out like what I really want to be making for myself, if I ever want to do my own product.
But that's awesome. That's like, it may be unexpected, but I mean, I know I've definitely sent a few people your way because I see, tight tolerance plate work. And I'm like, this is either going to be a giant pain for me to do, or Ed could plop it on the vacuum system and knock it out in a day,
Yeah. I mean, the Neo's it's the perfect machine for the kind of work I'm chasing anyway. So that was like, that turned out to be a good choice. Wasn't sure, like, because it seemed like there was a lot more work for something like a Haas, a lot of steel, a lot of, I'm trying to think, stuff that basically just wouldn't be a good fit for the Neo. But it kind of turns out there's a lot of Haas type shops out there, but not so many Neo shops. And so I think I probably get more of that work than like someone competing with the Haas, right? Like, it's kind of specialty work, but if you have the right machine, like seems like the customers find you. So that's been, I've been pretty lucky in that sense.
Yeah, totally. So let's get into kind of what you do with your Neo in your garage. Like we had talked just before the podcast, your first commercial commercial job shop type of work was kind of an interesting story. What happened there?
Yeah, so like the machine got installed in March of last year, and I spent like a month just kind of getting comfortable with it before I was open to taking any third party work. And then actually Adam the machinist on Instagram, reached out to me and said, hey, I got this. It was kind of like what you said. I got this work. I'm doing it right now. My machine's not really the most efficient way to do it. I think he was doing it on it wasn't on the Haas. It was his other machine.
Oh, the Mori?
Yeah, the Mori, the little Mori. And he showed me the parts who were like beautiful. And I was like, but they're aluminum. Right? So I was like, ooh, I could do those. And so he's like, hey, if you're interested, let me tell my client. It was actually his former employer, the place he was working before he went out on his own, Superb Industries. Yeah, or actually another company, but under the same family that owns both of them. And I don't know if I can say what the parts were. They let me show them. I don't know, but they were for some textile manufacturing, some sort of guide feed. Or no, that's not the right word. They were fabric feeds for textile production, and they were pretty complicated parts. Like looking back on it now, to me, I mean, they were for someone who was like, "Oh, this is my first job." I mean, that's probably not the best geometry to start with, and surface finish requirements. But yeah, at the time, I'm like, "Oh, it's a job. Let's try it." And it actually worked out pretty good. And I learned a lot about kind of just how to do that kind of work and how to deal with clients and stuff. So it was great that Adam gave me the opportunity to kind of grab that job. So yeah, but thanks, Adam, by the way.
Yeah, it seemed like you knocked it out of the park. And like I remember at the time looking at your Instagram and being like, man, that's quite the first part, quite the first non-internal part for you. So
yeah, it was funny because like I was, the Neo, I've got probing and everything on it. And I knew how to do basic probing, but like the first time, I basically did the cam, ran the part, checked a couple of things like with calipers. Because I think at the time all I had was like calipers and micrometers. Checked a couple of key dimensions, sent them the first article, and they're like, everything's great except like this hole's undersized, this hole's oversized. It's like lot of little, they're pretty tight. Some of the stuff was pretty tight tolerance because it was like press fit they're going to like put a press fit pin in some of the holes. And so I'm like, I didn't even own like a gauge pin or any good way to check holes. And then I was like, oh, but I do have a probe on the machine. It's like I can actually do in-process probing. So that was like the first job I was doing in-process probing on. And that took care of the problem. Like the second batch was accepted by them. And then, we had some other problems along the way because they had some features that needed like some really tiny long reach tooling. So it took a while to kind of get the surface finished. I always have trouble running the Harvey tools. You know what I'm saying? They're really long ones. They're really small, long ones. Yeah. Like they have a very narrow band where they run just right. And I mean, the problem's not the Harvey tool. It's me trying to get it dialed in. But yeah, so like that was I think that was probably the main challenge on that part was getting, there's like this narrow little slot. I think it was like 1/32 or maybe smaller in mill, but it was pretty deep. So I had to like get this really long reach tool to get in there. And I was either breaking them or finishing the slot, but surface finish was important because they were sliding fabric through, right? So it would snag if there's if it wasn't like glassy smooth. So yeah, it took a while to get that dialed in, which, in hindsight, that turned out to be a really good learning experience because that job pretty much had all the challenges, at least for the kind of work that, you do on the Neo, which is usually all about surface finish.
Totally. So let's kind of give everybody a base. If you haven't seen a Datron Neo, what are the specs of the machine, travels, spindle, all that stuff?
Yeah.
What makes it special?
So I would say it's large, like the easiest way to sum it up is it's fairly large machining envelope in a very small footprint on the floor. So it's like the size of a refrigerator, maybe like a kitchen refrigerator as far as width. It'll fit through a normal household door. Yeah, it has like 20-inch or it's really like 19.5 inch by 16 or 15.5. It's basically 20 by 16 table, XY travel.
Which is crazy. I mean, that's a little less X than I have in my Speedio and more Y than I have in my Speedio.
Yeah, and it's not as fast as the Speedio, but it's pretty fast. So I'm a metric guy, but I'll try. It's like the rapids on the machine are 28 meters per minute, which is what around 1,100 inches per minute, and it's a 40K RPM spindle. It's not all that powerful spindle, so it's basically high RPM, small tooling kind of machine. I think it's like 2.2 kilowatt spindle, and there's a couple of unique things about the Datron machines. One is they all use alcohol MQL for coolant, so there's no flood coolant on those machines. So they're really kind of optimized for aluminum and non-ferrous. You can switch the coolant out. It's a bit of a pain. You can put something in there that's safe to run with steel. But like right now, it's like you just get a blowtorch if you try to run steel with that MQL.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, because it's like 200 proof ethanol or IPA. I happen to run IPA in mine. But yeah, it's like 200 proof. Not a problem with aluminum or plastic. Well, of course, you don't run on plastic. But yeah, not something you'd want to be machining titanium with. So I think the other thing is the control. So it's a super simple. It's basically a touchscreen control. It's like a big iPad, and the software is really designed. I would say it's designed for a non-machinist to be able to master pretty quickly. Assuming the other concepts of what they're trying to do. But yeah, the control is like super easy for someone like me. With I'm not coming from a machinist background really, more from like I said, software developer and hobby machining, right? So I was a little intimidated by trying to, buy a machine with a FANUC control or something, or FANUC, however you say that. Sorry, Chris. And yeah, so that was one, it kind of took one variable out of the equation. I didn't have to worry about figuring out the control. It was very easy. So that was a big plus for me too.
Yeah, that control, I played around with it at, AU a little bit and IMTS, and it's so cool, like being able to draw on a camera picture of the part where you want to probe, and things like that are just insane.
Yeah, and the other, you kind of mentioned it, the other like really nice feature I think on all it's available on all the Datron machines, but particularly on the Neo, is you can convert that whole work envelope over to vacuum work holding, or you can do like half the table or the whole table. In probably like 10 minutes to basically switch between vacuum work holding or regular, vise and fixture bolted to the table, or put the fourth axis on, right? It's super fast to switch configurations. So it's like a prototyper's dream machine. And that's really what I like. That's kind of work I like doing. So that's probably like that was the main appeal to me. And I wanted the fourth axis too, because I kind of got hooked on that with the Pocket NC. I don't do a lot of 5-axis simultaneous. Pocket NC can do it just kind of slow, but I did a lot of 3+2 or 3+1, 3+2. So I wanted at least a rotary axis on whatever machine I bought. And I end up, it's optional on the Neo, but I went ahead and checked that box when I ordered the machine. Been very happy. So that fourth axis let me land some work that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So we haven't really talked about what I do on the Neo these days. So after that Superb job, I basically was doing a lot of prototyping, small run stuff for just various companies, some technology companies, and some, actually I was getting a lot of work from other machine shops, right? They had one piece of an order that they didn't want to make in-house with their machines. And so I'd make that for them. And then sometimes it was just fixtures, right, for them to use in their shop.
That's awesome.
Then, so I got some work that basically made a lot of sense to do. It was on the rotary axis. It was, I probably can't say what it was, but it was for a university, but it was, I can say it had to do with a high power microwave. And some components for that. And that was I couldn't have done that work without both the work area and the rotary axis. So it's kind of validated that I think I had the right machine for me, for the kind of stuff I want to do. But it has its limits. If you're looking to do a bunch of steel or titanium, like John Grimsmo, that would not be the right machine for him with the materials he works with. It could do all those, but it's probably not competitive, with something like the Mori, or definitely not with the Kern for that kind of work. But
right. But for punch plates, on the other hand.
Yep, for vacuum held stuff, or any kind of aluminum work. The other limitation on that, you get pretty large XY, but you don't have it's a portal, like a fixed gantry machine, so you have some limitations on Z reach. But
and it's a direct shank machine, right?
Yeah, direct clamp. That the Neo is. The other Datron machines all have HSK spindles available. I mean, you can get different spindles on those machines, some of which are direct clamping, but I've never seen anything but HSK out in the field on those.
So your maximum tool size is what, 8 millimeters?
So 8 millimeter shank, 14 millimeter diameter, cutting diameter, is the biggest it'll fit in the ATC. So right. Datron's, okay. So they sell some tools that have a bigger cutting head than the actual shank, but really with that that spindle power, the machine does really well with the kind of 8 millimeter single flutes and smaller, at least for roughing. And then there's 14 millimeter base mill. There's actually 14 millimeter single flute that works really well in the Delrin work that I'm doing. So that's my favorite roughing tool now for that work.
Awesome. So speaking of that, you're making ice cube trays.
Yeah. So my client for that work's a little hesitant for me to share too many details, but it's basically their master molds, right? And for the food industry, that's probably about as much as I can say about the end use of those. But they make their silicone molds from the masters that I make here. It's a lot of usually custom work. I hardly ever make the same mold design more than once, but they always have new designs all the time. So that's most of those molds are 18. The starting stocks are 18 inch by 12.5 inch by 1 inch, which is if I had a Haas, I don't think I could fit that on there. The Haas I was looking at, the CM1, that wouldn't even come close to fitting on there. It's perfect for the Neo. And it's, there's a lot of small tooling. So high RPM spindle, the 40K really helps with that. And I was doing originally, last year, I was doing those molds in Mic 6, and we switched over to Acetal at the beginning of this year to kind of improve throughput and help with the costs. And it's I have that process pretty well dialed in on the Neo now. And I'm already looking at maybe a second machine
Yeah.
Which,
So I've actually got that as a question a little bit later. But yeah, our first Patreon question was from Design the Everything. And he said, how many ice cube trays do you need? So to turn that on its
the ice
head,
cube trays.
yeah, to turn that on its head, have you ever tried to make ice cubes out of a scrap piece or something like that? Or a test
So
piece?
I've been noodling around with the design for, so you probably, if you follow my Instagram, you saw that aluminum sign I made for my sister. She lives out in a small ranch just outside of where I live. I'm in San Antonio, Texas, by the way. So she's out a little bit out in the hill country, and they just built this party barn on the ranch. I don't know if you know what a party barn is, but in Texas, right, you got the barns for the horses and the barns for the dancing and smoking and drinking, right? So, so they built the party barn out there. Just opened it last month. So she asked for like a sign. She wanted like a custom sign to put on inside the party barn. And yeah, so I started working on this ice cube tray or ice cube design. You know, they're really big silicone square. They make the big cube mold or cube ice. Mm-hmm. And like one ice cube goes, fills up your whole glass. So
actually for like whiskey, ice cubes and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or like a round one. Yeah. So I've been working on, the thing is like, it's hard to get time to do my projects, like my fun projects. And even if I'm available, my spindle's not a bad problem to have, but it's, that was like, I was kind of talking about my business plan originally when I signed the dotted line on the Neo. I was thinking, it's going to be half hobby, half, or maybe, a quarter doing some sort of, prototyping for my own products, which I didn't think I'd be manufacturing here. And then just prototyping. And then the other remaining quarter of the spindle time to be whatever job shop work I could find. Right. And so the way that worked out is I got 0 time for my stuff and a little bit of time for prototyping and the bulk of the work right lately has been job shop work. Yeah. So I mean, it's a good place to be because it really accelerated my learning. Like I really thought it would take me 4 years to kind of get comfortable with the work I'm doing now on that machine. And like, it's nothing like, having a deadline and having a customer, right? Just waiting for the parts to kind of get you motivated to figure out a problem, right? How to solve a problem.
Oh yeah.
So
I've said a few times that like working in a prototype shop is what accelerated my learning so much because, you start doing a job here and a job there. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I can apply what I learned on that first job and what I learned on the second job to this third job and, make it a lot easier. And you're always learning something, but you're always kind of relearning and reapplying previous knowledge too.
Yeah. Like it took me about 4 months of doing prototype work for other people to realize that, it's fun to design fixtures, but that's really not what you want for prototype. You want like the same work holding over and over, right? For like something quick to set up. So that's like the rotary axis is like perfect for the stuff for most of the prototyping jobs I do, even if it's not, if it's just like a 2-sided part, because the quantity is usually 10 or less on that stuff. And like, I'll just do it one at a time on the rotary because it's so much easier than having to like flip it in the vise or build a little fixture or whatever, or soft jaws. So I'm getting spoiled with that. But yeah, like I think it's like your customers bring their problems to you too, right? So that's the other thing. I'm getting a broader exposure through having a machine like, a Neo or any kind of industrial machine available to you, right? You start to get your foot a little bit more into the manufacturing world. Your clients are probably involved in manufacturing or working for a client that is. And so, yeah, it's kind of like I'm really into manufacturing. Like I'm a manufacturing geek now. I'm not an expert by any means. It's more like a fan. It's probably the best way to say it. I'm a fan of manufacturing and interested in learning as much as I can. Like I went to EMO in 2019. I'd already signed the paperwork for the Neo, but it was kind of a long lead time to get it because I was holding out for the new model that they were announcing at EMO. So yeah, that was pretty eye opening, just seeing all the different machine tools and processes and stuff. I thought I knew a lot. I didn't know anything. Every day I'm still finding out I don't know anything about manufacturing.
That's what keeps it interesting.
Seems like there's so much going on there. And it's actually pretty rapid. It sounds like most people think manufacturing, if they're not involved in manufacturing, they think, I think they think it's old Rust Belt stuff, right? But it's one of the most advanced or areas of advanced technology there are out there. That's what I'm finding out. So, yeah,
for sure. So actually, speaking of technology, that kind of dovetails a little bit into another Patreon question from Josh Hacko. He said, thoughts on your height gauge and what does it get used most for? Because I'm actually very interested as well, because that is one thing that we really want to buy is a digital height gauge. Because I've got a Tessa height at work that I really like, but your Trimos looks really cool.
Yeah, they're both. I think that the Tessa, I looked pretty closely at that one too. Almost went that I would have been happy with either one. Let's put it that way. Yeah, so I end up with is it Trimos or Trimos? I'm not sure how you say it, but it's a Swiss company, right? And I always say Trimos, but the V7 series, they have like V2 all the way through V9, I think, and they're all pretty similar. They just like each number or each increment up has either more software features or more accuracy or both, right? So I probably overbought. Like the V4 or V5 probably would have been an okay, and I think that would be like around 5,000 for one of those, 3,000 to 5,000.
So does the V7 have the automatic movement, or is it still manual up and down?
No, it does have automatic. I think the 7 and the 9. Well, where it's motorized. Yeah, so you can do the motorized raising and lowering of the probe, and then it has. I don't know if you call them cycles, but like when you're probing diameter of a bore, it basically has motor assist for that. Like you kind of just start it and then you still have to apply pressure on the knob, but it's assisting. It's hard to explain. You have to watch a video, but it takes away the feel. Like you don't have to necessarily have the feel like you would on a fully manual machine. Cause you apply too much pressure or not enough and you don't get accurate readings. So this kind of, it moves the probe or applies the pressure to the probe tip consistently using the motor. So that's one feature I really like, especially probing bores. And then it has the ability to measure straightness. But I need to get the little either the probe, the digital probe that goes on there, or the mount for an indicator. So I don't do that yet. But I'm mainly just using it I use it more on the prototypes. I don't use it on the mold work because that's it's not real tight tolerance work. It's more around surface finish. But yeah, for the prototype stuff, it's really come in handy. Got a nice surface plate to run it on. And the software is really easy to use. The only one I've ever actually seen or like really looked at was the Mitutoyo, the one I think that John had. I can't remember the name of that product line, but it's a really nice machine. It's probably at least as capable as the Trimos and the Tessa, but the UI and the software looks a little dated. So
yeah, the Trimos has like a really neat looking screen. I know it's pretty unique in that it's black with white lettering and all that.
Yeah, and it's very fast to do like whatever kind of probing cycle, or not probing cycle, but measurement cycle you want to do. Like it's well thought out UI. It's got good human factors considerations, I would say. Yeah, so it doesn't get used as much as this year as it was using it last year, because I'm mostly been focused on the mold work this year.
So would you use it? Do you use it mostly for hole size or location or both, or what was your?
I pick up whatever usually the client tells me is critical. And so I even I think the smallest probe tip I have is 1 millimeter on that guy. So I can pick up some, get into some tight spaces and pick up like a step or an offset or whatever, between heights. And yeah, so it's usually, I'm using it to measure the distances between features, right? Like a lot of times that's the call out. Yeah, and diameters. I would say, I don't think it does anything that you can't do with pretty much any other height gauge. It's very easy to collect those measurements. Like in my experience, like I'm not a metrology expert by any means. I wasn't like even sure I needed something like this until I got it and started using it, and was like, I couldn't live without it now.
It's so nice. I tell people that like my first stop when I'm checking a part is usually our height gauge at work instead of the CMM, because it just requires so much less setup and you're fast. Just there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And you can put, you can capture the data too, which is nice, because I can send a report to the customer, with the measurements and stuff like that. So that for a guy like me, that's just a one-man shop, anything that streamlines any of the process is a win in my book. So like I said, I probably spent more than I needed to on that particular, getting like all the features. But to me, that's, metrology is something you invest in And that's something I plan on having, probably forever, right? As long as I'm doing this kind of work. So that was one of the places I was okay investing. And then, that's probably my only interesting piece of metrology gear. And then I have some optical flats, which I picked up off eBay. I watched some videos on how to use them, but I don't do any scraping or lapping yet. So that was a preparatory purchase.
Yeah, definitely. So Josh's next question was, what's your next piece of metrology equipment?
Yeah, so probably as uninteresting as it sounds, probably a nice high-end Mitutoyo micrometer. So I don't know if I need a quantum mic, but I have like a no-name.
I will tell you, the quantum mics are worth they're not even that much more expensive than the standard ones, but they are worth it for sure.
Yeah, I've seen them out there, and I have my calipers, like everything else I have is Mitutoyo, my indicators. But I still have my Amazon micrometer that I bought, like when I was just doing hobby, when I had the hobby machines. So like I check it, everyone, I have the reference, I check it, the standard, but I would really like to have something that actually measured one more digit too. That's the other thing. He doesn't really, I think my micrometer measures out to like in millimeters, like it's like there are 3 zeros, right? So, which probably, for the kind of work I'm doing, that's more accuracy than I can hit with any of my machines here. But again, it's like, invest for the future, because who knows, maybe there'll be a Karn here someday.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and for a buying tip for those, I don't know if you get Zorro emails, if you've ever ordered from them, but
not Zorro.
They send out, if you got into their mailing list, they send out 25% off coupons. I don't know, maybe quarterly or twice quarterly. And Mitutoyo mics are on that. So like we got our 1 to 2 quantum mic for 25% off, which was a killer deal.
Very nice. Yeah, I'll look for that. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. And then Josh's last question was, what's your old job compared to your current? Like, I guess, how do you feel differently? And then what's been the biggest shift? And does it feel like work?
That's a good question. So the day job, that work felt like work, but I actually love what I was doing too. So I worked for Texas. There used to be a supermarket chain, but they're doing a lot more now. Like they've been around about 120 years, I think. I probably got that wrong, but they've been around a long time. They're one of the largest private employers in Texas, actually in the U.S. And
wow.
The company that probably no one's ever heard of unless you're in Texas is HEB. And I worked in their IT shop for pretty much most of my career. And they were a company that was considered pretty innovative in retail and technology and supply chain, all kinds of stuff. Like I learned a lot there. I just assumed every company ran like they do. So and then I started visiting other places and realizing that it's like it's kind of something special going on at that company. So a lot of what I learned there, even though it has nothing to do with machining, it did have to do with business, right? So that was a pretty nice knowledge base to basically go do anything on my own. So that I John Saunders went to Babson, right? And I worked at HEB. So we both got very good business background training, right? So
that's really cool.
Education.
Yeah. I'd seen HEB before, I think, driving through Texas, but I had no idea it was that large.
Yeah, they're like, they're over 100, I want to say 135,000 employees, USA and Mexico. Probably around 350 stores, nicest grocery stores around, if you ask me. Even if I didn't work there. But, so I've always been like a nerd, like technical guy. Went to college for engineering, computer stuff, related stuff. So didn't really know anything about just business and entrepreneurship or anything until I started, working professionally in my career. And that's, picked up a lot from that. So like, I know a lot of people, they've come into manufacturing, or like John Grimswell, he started right into his own business. Like, I don't think I could do that. I wouldn't have had the background knowing what I knew at 22 or 23 to be successful like him. So, that's pretty impressive what he's done. Same thing with John Saunders, right? Those are the two kind of benchmarks I use for just kind of deciding you're going to do something and, skipping the normal salary type job, right? And just going right into high risk starting up your own business, right? I was a little more risk averse, right? I got my career out of the way, retired from that, and then said, okay, now I can do what I want, right? Or try
to start your second career.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, definitely. I did not take the kind of risks those guys took, right? Yeah. So but it's very inspiring. Like just especially seeing like all the people, like especially young people kind of coming into manufacturing. It almost seems to be having a renaissance, right?
Oh yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, at least as far as people thinking about it as a career. And so that's exciting to me.
For the second side of the question, what's been the biggest shift day to day? I mean, obviously you don't have a commute anymore, but are there any other big stark differences between working there and working at home?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think the day job, doing it the same or similar work for, like I did it for basically for 30 years. By the end of that, it kind of gets, less challenging, less interesting. So like switching over to this, it's like all new, fresh and new again, right? So I'm learning again. So that's a big plus. It feels like work to me, definitely now. Not so much last year because it was kind of hit or miss. I could go like 1 or 2 weeks with no work and then maybe have a couple of jobs. Now it's like pretty much every day I got work to do on the machine. So yeah, it's become like a normal day job. And I always thought, working for yourself, it's like, you don't have a boss. You're only your boss, but no, that's not true. Your customer's your boss, right? So there's always a boss. The person who's paying you is your boss. So you figure that out pretty quick. But yeah, it's nice to be able to have, I have discretion on what work I take on and what I say no to. And I say no a lot, probably more now than ever, especially for like new customer or new clients. Like I send them elsewhere. I have a pretty good network of other shops. I either get work that's not appropriate for my machine or above my skill level, right? And I usually, because of Instagram and Instant Machinist, I know somebody who probably would be interested in that work and could make the customer happy. So I do a lot of, referring out of work, and I receive, kind of works both ways, right? I get a lot of work sent to me that's kind of appropriate for my machine. Like when Adam sent me the Superb job.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I think that when you have a boutique kind of machine or process, niching down like that is really important. We've had a few guests on the show that have all echoed that sentiment. And like, I have a few friends that, run wire EDM shops or laser shops. And like, they are constantly saying, man, you should just pick up one of these machines because there is more work than I could ever touch because there's not many of me out there,
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the like best skills you can learn, and especially for, kind of running your own business, is learn to say no, right? That's probably one of the smartest things I've picked up over the last year. It's not so much what you say yes to, it's what you say no to that can make or break you. So yeah, that was part of the journey was learning that it's okay to say no. There's times when you better say no because you're either going to take on work that you just can't do. Customers are going to be disappointed, or it might be, this is not the client or the industry that you want to focus on, right? And it might cost you your client or a client that you want to do work for, but you can't because you're tied up with this other job, right? So yeah, so that's kind of, it's weird not having employees. Like, everything that has to get done in the company, there's only one guy to do it, right? So that's kind of weird. That's a big change from working at a big company.
So did you manage a team when you were at HEB?
Yeah, there's like, I wasn't managing a team when I left. Like my last position there I was a member of a technical team, but at many points in my career, I was running either software development team or some, advanced technology group. So yeah, on and off, I've been both manager and individual contributor and, team member. So that's nice because that's part of, I have gotten exposure to kind of all the, I guess all the viewpoints. Yeah. So except for customer, right? So that's a new one right now. You've got customers who you're accountable to, right? Which is fine. I mean, I've been lucky. I've got great customers. I haven't had any bad experiences. I was listening to, John was kind of talking about slow paying customers, right? I guess, especially schools. I would say my most problematic customers have been government also, but not so much from, they don't pay me. It's more like just the paperwork to get to the point where you can take the job, right? There's so much paperwork.
Yeah,
to get onboarded as a vendor. Yeah, especially universities are the worst. And then it's like some little job, right? And then you never hear from them again until the next semester.
Yeah. You invest an entire week into all the paperwork, and then all of a sudden there's nothing. You're like, oh, great.
Yeah,
okay.
I had one client that was a professor or a researcher actually, and so it was kind of funny because he was, I don't want to say where he was at, but he was at the university on the East Coast, and we kind of he had something. It was an interesting prototype part, and he wanted me to make it. This is before I had the Neo. It was actually on the Pocket NC. And it took, a couple of months to kind of get through their procurement, onboarding, And literally by the time congratulations, you're now approved to, take bid on work from university or whatever. And I get an email from him. Oh, I switched universities. I'm now over on the West Coast. Oh, and by the way, you got to start the process over here too. Right? I still
Oh
want to
my
see
goodness.
So that was kind of interesting. Yeah. So I don't take any ITAR work today or any government defense. Probably never will, at least not with my current setup. If I ever, expand into a bigger place, I might. Or if, like, the work I do now dries up and I'm looking for something different, maybe. But yeah, right now it's like, I know those guys deal with I try to stay away from the things, to answer Josh's question more generally. I try to stay away from the things that aren't fun and try to focus as much on the stuff that either helps me learn new skills or get better at what I'm doing, keep my customers happy. So yeah,
I think that's
it
really
feels
important.
like work, but it's very satisfying work. So I love what I'm doing right now. I've never been happier, I think, professionally.
That's awesome. That's really cool to hear. So on to the next question. IGS Dan, who he said that you were his last install before he left
Yes.
Datron. So kind of a similar, actually, I guess it's a similar question. He said, since you started machining as a hobby and then turned it into a career, do you think the day-to-day business has strengthened or weakened your passion for CNC?
Yeah, I would definitely say strengthened because of the accelerated learning. Like that, I didn't anticipate that. Like when I added the Neo here, or started taking on bigger commercial work, I was actually very concerned about that very issue. Like nothing, kills the passion more than basically adding customer money and timelines and budgets and all that stuff into the equation, right? But actually, it's actually what I found is just it pushes you so hard to keep learning, right? That's the thing I enjoy the most, because like now I probably, I feel like I jumped 4 years ahead of where I would have been if I stayed with the hobby machines or didn't take commercial work. And as far as like my understanding of manufacturing, kind of how everything works in that business, or at least in the job shop business. So yeah,
I think that shows in your posts on like the kind of parts you've been able to do for sure.
Yeah, I think like the only I catch myself every once in a while wishing I had more time to do some of my fun stuff. Right? But I know there'll be time for that. So, it was like the other thing. I was very motivated to have the machine earn its keep. I had a certain payback period in my business plan. And then, I wanted to meet or beat that. And so that was kind of the other big incentive to take on third party work. But I'm at the point now where, the Neo's paid for itself. So if I wanted to, I could probably slow down and just get some hobby hours on that spindle, but I like when I'm doing too much. It's like I'm just keep kind of going at the same pace.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine that, your ice cube trays probably have quite a bit of spindle uptime. So you're not at least, tending a 30-second cycle time or, something crazy like that.
Yeah. So those are usually, the Mike 6 ones were 2 to 3 days sometimes of solid machining per part, right? Before it could ship. And which was a little too much for me because I don't run 7x24. Like if I'm asleep, the machine's off, especially with, ethanol, MQL, just gotta be careful.
How's the Datron work with that? Like how is it with pausing and then going back? Because that's like a lot of 3D surfacing too. So would you just like run all your roughing and then go to sleep and then run all your finishing, or how did that work?
Yeah, exactly. I would break it up into, usually like on the Mike 6, I would do like 4-hour. I try to get, enough operations to do like 4-hour segments, and more to give me a break than the machine. And then, so I would stop the work. I usually turn the vacuum pump off at night. So you're going to lose your reference, right? You're going to have to reprobe in the morning, but it's very accurate. Like I had no problem picking up and finishing. Like I might finish half the cavities, which is, if you have any kind of misalignment, it's going to show. So I'm pretty, that was one of the concerns I had, is how well is this going to work? But it's like, I've done it so many times now, even pulled the part off the vacuum plate to go do another job and then put it back on and re-picked up the WCS very accurately.
That's
and
awesome.
Just kind of picked up where I left off. But yeah, you can't actually pause the machine. You can stop it, like jog around and have it restart the last operation, right? The same position. There's a few options there. I think most CNC machines can do that, but it's super easy to do on the Neo.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. So next, well, it wasn't really a question, but Spencer Webb just said, tell you hi.
Hi, Spence. Still love the precision stones. I have the set of his round precision. What does he call them? The
PFGs.
PFGs. Yeah, I love those. It's kind of funny. I use them more. I'm probably abusing them, but I use them more for deburring. Like, so for every ice tray that I make, I get there's a big sheet of Mike 6 that needs to be, it always comes with a rough sockhead edge, like a little burr. So I used to use the Noga, but it's a lot of work. Like, so I'm looking anything that kind of speeds up the workflow. So I found out it's using the stone to knock the burr down super fast. And, I don't have to hold the plate like I do with the Noga. Just can sit on a flat surface and I stone one side, flip it over, stone the other side. And it's not perfectly clean edge. It just kind of knocks the burr so it's horizontal, but then it'll go on the vacuum with no problem. So that's the main thing. I can't have the burr kind of holding the plate up off the vacuum table. So that's probably they have more hours on those stones doing that than probably anything else. So I want to get another set that's more for, like stoning down the vise. You have the good pair and then the shop pair, right?
So, yeah. No, we love ours. I mean, we've got I think a 4-inch set or maybe a 6-inch set. I can't remember, but yeah, I use them all the time. And actually, I was just starting to think recently. I was like, man, maybe I need to send these back for a regrind. And then I watched his Instagram live that he just recently posted, and he was talking about like, oh, it's on my website, how to clean them. And I cleaned them, and I was like, well, now they look great, so I don't need to do that.
Yeah, I clean mine probably about once a week because the aluminum comes with the protective plastic sheet. So when you peel that off, it always, like, even if I clean it with alcohol, there's always a little bit of gummy residue, and always like that stone notices it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've got an anti-inhibitor on a lot of my 0 points in my mill, and if I don't clean every little bit of that, the stone will for sure find it every time and gum up. Yeah. So I know the feeling for sure.
Exactly. And Spence just got a new machine. I think he's got an Okamoto coming in, right? So.
Oh yeah, he's going to be showing up on the podcast sometime soon here, so we're definitely going to tear into that.
Looking forward to that.
So Tom from Inspiration Metalworks asked, how many of those fancy diamond face mills have you gone through so far? And I hope the answer is 1.
I've only gone through 1. I'm on number 2.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Yeah. So the first one I had, there was an incident. Let's just say I turned a 1-piece tool into 2 pieces pretty quickly.
Oh, and those are not cheap.
No, they're not. But actually, Datron was they helped me figure out what went wrong, and were very good about getting me back up and running. So I give definitely props to Datron on that one. We were all heartbroken about that.
So was this a purely, error, or was there a weirdness in the post or weirdness in the machine, or,
Not the machine. It's actually, I can't say for sure. There was it was either the tool was longer than expected. It had to do with the way that the tool interacted with the ATC during the tool change. Because actually, I don't know if you've seen, the Neo has these spring-loaded pockets that hold the tools. Mm-hmm. So when the spindle comes down, it basically, it's direct clamping. So it slides over the collet opens in the spindle, it slides over the tool shank, and it's kind of pushing down against the tools in this little spring-loaded pocket. So it applies some upward pressure to make sure the tool is fully seated in the spindle collet. And so there's a little bit of travel on the ATC pocket. In the way, if you look at the diamond tool, it actually kind of, the diamond is on a little extension in front of the tool, and it sits too deep in that pocket, basically. So depending on how far the spring-loaded pocket moves, it can actually collide inside that pocket.
No.
So it was a combination. I think, there's some error on my part and some information that probably Datron didn't realize wasn't in their documentation. So it's all been kind of addressed now. So you have to set the tool up a special way when you set the little collet stop ring that goes on it. It's different than how you set up all the other tools. So now everybody understands it. We didn't all understand it at the beginning. So that tool has some special setup instructions if you want to use it in the ATC. So the one I have now, it works great in ATC. I use that tool. I got to use it recently on a job for John Grimsmo. So yeah, it's actually one of my favorite tools. I rarely get a chance to use it. Not everyone needs mirror finish. So
it's pretty amazing. I mean, like there are mirror finishes, and then there are diamond mirror finishes. Like it's really cool.
Yeah, so it's it's always fun to get to run a job with that tool.
So scary, how fast do you spin that thing? Like I would have no idea where to start.
It's actually the slowest tool I run. So that runs it's a 14-inch diameter tool. On the Neo, you run at 10,000 RPM. It's about as slow as you can go with that spindle. Yeah. And 500 millimeters per minute feed rate is like how as fast as you want to go. And it's a tiny, tiny axial engagement. It's like 0.03 to 0.05, 0.03 to 0.05 millimeters. So you're basically taking off a very thin foil of the surface with that tool.
Still, that is pretty amazing. And
yeah,
that's
it
hilarious.
Makes really weird, makes the weirdest chips like you'd ever seen. They're aluminum, but they float on air. And they're large. They're not really small. They're actually pretty large, but they end up everywhere in the shop. Like those are the only chip containment issue I have is when I use that tool. So, because they kind of float up out of the machine instead of down, like most aluminum chips. Their gravity does not affect them as much as air current.
That's crazy.
They're so light. Yeah.
Well, and speaking of chips too, like that's one thing I am so jealous of the Datrons is that, you've shown pictures and videos of you scooping out your chip thing and they're all dry and like all your parts come out pretty much washed. Like,
yeah. So that was, I may have overemphasized that like in my purchasing decision, but that was like one of the biggest factors. Like I was around machines like before I made my purchase decision around like, I'm trying to think what I saw my first CNC machine, or maybe just on the videos, but basically every time I saw flood coolant and like the mess, like I'm thinking that's not going to work in my garage. My wife still parks the car in the garage. Everyone was talking about, you get oil mist on everything or coolant mist. It's like, that's not going to work. So yeah, when I saw like this ethanol MQL, and all the other stuff like the maintenance and the sump and cleaning out the mushroom farm that goes down there, so like that's not for me. That's not really what I want. So yeah, it's really basically no maintenance. I mean, the downside, it's a consumable, right? So it's, you use it up as you're machining. It doesn't get recycled or recirculated, but it uses such a tiny amount. Like I think I've used less than 15 gallons since I bought the machine. Mainly it's because I'm doing acetyl and Delrin parts now. I don't run it for that, but yeah, it's like a little bit goes a long way.
Well, I remember you had quite the issue getting it when you first got the machine too.
Yeah, I've still have not been able to source 200 proof ethanol, even denatured, just because nobody is comfortable shipping that to a residential address. There's a local supplier that I can get it from, go pick it up, but it's like their minimum order size is, I don't need a 55 gallon drum. So not yet. I mean, I know people with the Neos that have bought 55 gallon drums, but IPA actually, for me, it's easy to get. I can get it from Uline. It wasn't easy during COVID, but now it's starting to become regularly available again. And, I get a 5 gallon poly container. My next investment in the shop is actually be a fire cabinet. I don't have one of those right now because I'm starting to keep 5 to 10 gallons on hand. Gotta kind of be careful with that.
Oh yeah. Well, I was thinking about that, about a 55 gallon drum of ethanol. That's a bomb just waiting to happen.
Yeah. So I use isopropyl alcohol. A couple of things my experience, it leaves it's cleaner than ethanol, than the typical ethanol you use in Datron. So mainly because those are denatured it's not the ethanol. I think it's whatever the denaturant is. It seems to leave a little bit of a residue.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I mean, nothing like, coolant, but I get nothing with the IPA, like zero residue.
Well, I mean, I clean parts after I machine them with isopropyl very often. So
yeah. And actually, and probably most people wouldn't agree with me, but I like the smell of IPA better than high test ethanol. Just from an odor perspective, from a consumption perspective, it's different. But when it comes to drinking, But actually, IPA, like a lot of people hate that smell, right? Because it reminds them of hospitals. But I find it's not annoying at all to me. I mean, it's not like it gets really intense in the garage. You barely smell it. Like when you open the door, you kind of catch a whiff. But yeah, it's like. I've yet to try ethanol. I think ethanol works better, supposedly, than IPA for aluminum, just a little bit better cooling. But I've never had any problems with IPA on that machine. So I'm sticking with it.
Yeah, definitely. So his other question was ask about air conditioning status and air compressor woes.
Yes. So air conditioning, I keep talking about on my podcast. It's kind of a standing joke now because I've been in the market for mini split for probably a year now. And Texas summers are pretty brutal. COVID kind of put off the plans to get it installed. But now that, things are kind of opening up again, I can get handyman to the house. I'm getting ready to probably pull the trigger this month or next on getting the mini split installed. Because right now I have just this little roll around like floor AC, which works great except for like May through October.
Yep.
I can't keep up. Yeah.
I know the feeling. I don't know about you guys, but we've already had our first 100-degree
Arizona.
day. So
yeah. We get that plus 100% humidity, like all day.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
Literally,
I can't. No, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, I'm dumping like 5 gallons out of the air conditioning condenser tray every day, pretty much.
Jeez.
But compressors, yeah. So I've been through a couple of scroll compressors, and I'm actually back on the original compressor I bought when I bought the Datron. It was like a cat piston compressor, which it's probably a little underrated for the Neo's air needs. It's working okay now because my 2 scroll compressors have both died. So,
and those were Eastwood compressors? Yeah.
Yeah. And when they worked, they were very good, like very quiet. Had no problem keeping up with the Neo's copious air demand. But they're not, they don't seem to have very good reliability long term, at least for not the kind of duty cycle I was putting them through.
Yeah, when we were looking at compressors at the end of last year, we had looked because Eastwood now has a bigger unit as well, like a 5 or a 7.5 horsepower or something like that. And we were looking at that. And
I saw that.
Like I had heard your woes. I heard a few other people who had grenaded theirs, and I was like, I just can't, like this is like the lifeblood of our shop. Like our machine's not going to run without it, so I can't really take a chance.
Yeah, I think eventually everybody ends up with a Kaiser, right? Or rotary screw of some sort. So that's what I'm actually looking for. It's my permanent into compressor woes. Yeah,
it's definitely not as inexpensive and it's not as quiet, but they do seem to be pretty bulletproof.
Yeah, it's such a critical part of the business, right? You're out of business when that compressor's not working. So I've learned that lesson the hard way a couple of times. So now all I don't so much care about the cost. I just want it to work and be reliable and have someone I can call who'll be here like the same day or next day if it's down, right?
Exactly.
So like the big shops.
Yeah. Well, you're putting out enough product now that where you need that kind of reliability. So makes sense.
But thanks for asking.
Oh yeah. I'm glad that Tom asked that because I was
going to ask. Okay.
I was definitely going to ask those as well because listening to DFX like I do as well, those are always questions on my mind when I start an episode. It's like, oh man, I wonder if he got his air conditioning installed, and oh man, I wonder what's going on with the compressor.
Yeah, it's actually we had a couple this week it's hot again, but like we've been having pretty nice weather for this time of year. So that's kind of every time I get another comfortable day in the shop, it kind of moves to the back priority. But
that's great.
I think my luck's about to run out on that though. We're almost into June here, so
yeah. Well, thankfully we were thinking last year about buying a AC unit and just putting it under the door when we were there. But so far this year, it's been very dry, which means our swamp cooler, which just got replaced at the end of summer last year, has been working amazing. Like it'll be 99 outside, and I'll go into the shop and it's like 72. I'm like, oh, I can deal with this. Like, there's no need to buy the AC yet.
Right.
Sure, once monsoons start and the humidity starts raising, we'll be talking a different tune. But for now, I'm super happy. So the next question we had was from Elson Knives, and he asked, if not a second Neo, what other machine will be next in the shop? A Swiss? Question mark?
Yeah. So what I want and what I end up getting, kind of 2 different forks in the road. So actually, I am very interested and have been for a while in having a lathe because I want to learn turning. I know nothing about it. Not necessarily thinking of something for commercial use, just at least not the first machine. So I'm actually, but again, I'm kind of out of I don't know where I'd put it right now. I don't have a lot of room. So this will probably have to wait till we make our move to a house with a little bit more shop space. But I'd like to have, I would love to have a Swiss machine. It's just because those look like challenging to set up. And it's like one of the favorite machines I like watching, like make parts on YouTube. But yeah, I don't have like a business plan to go, hey, I'm going to be, Mr. Swiss, right? Because I got pretty stiff competition right down the road. Swiss Amations in Fredericksburg, Texas, which is like 40 minutes from my house. But yeah, I do want some sort of turning. you know, I mean, the machine I want, I don't think anyone makes, which is like, I kind of want a little hobby CNC machine, but it has, not like the Take. I want something like it has live tooling and sub spindle, but it's a hobby machine, right? Desktop hobby machine. But barring that, I actually was looking at the Sugami that was
Jake got.
Ash. Yeah. It was M08.
M08SY2, I think.
Yeah. So that was pretty cool. Actually, I could see myself with something like that maybe down the road when I have a little bit more room, a little bit more power to avail. Yeah, so that was perfect. I had every thing I would want on my lathe, right? It's small. That's the other thing. I want something, it's not too big. So at some point I'll have some sort of turning capability. Don't know yet, when that's going to be.
But as far as next machine, are you hurting for
as far
another
as
spindle?
the business, depending on where this work goes with the molds, like last year, I was pretty well set on getting a second Neo because when we were doing the Mic 6 ones, they take a while, right? So in order to keep up with the client demand, we were going to need more spindles to get the same throughput, right, per week. And now that we switch over to the Seidel or to Delrin, it's just having one spindle here is more than enough to keep up. Although that's going to change. I don't know if I'll make it to the end of the year before we're kind of back in the same place where they're sending me so many molds that I need to get a second spindle going. If that's the case, it'll probably be, it'll be a, a Neo, just like the one I have here, but just basic options, just a 3-axis configuration with vacuum dedicated to the mold work.
That would be awesome.
And then I would have, I'd leave my current Neo set up for prototyping with the rotary axis. And then when if I got overflow from the mold work, I could just very quickly convert that one over to vacuum also and keep both machines going.
So no thoughts of going up to a cube machine?
I'd love to have an MX cube, but not right now. For the work I'm doing, I don't need it, right? If my client decides they want to do much larger molds, then something that exceeds the Neo's machining envelope, then I would definitely be open to it. But I'd rather, ideally, what I would like to see is the mold work kind of keeps my one Neo busy, and then I maybe look for a different kind of machine. You know what I'm saying? Don't know yet what that would be. As far as I think it would be 5-axis. I'd like to have my second milling machine be a 5-axis machine of some sort.
Yeah, definitely. Have you thought about whenever Pocket NC releases their Pro machine?
Yeah, I'm definitely following that. And also I don't know if I would also get something a little bit big. See, it depends on where I go with the business, right? So it's too early for me to say. I think I need some more thinking time on it because I think a lot of the stuff, I'm kind of constrained by the space I'm in. I expect that's going to change probably in the next 12 to 24 months. We don't know yet. We're looking for something that's still it's residential, but more rural, where I can have more land and more shop space. I love I don't want to give up the idea of my work being where I live. It's just it's too convenient, right? Not having to commute, not having to drive to a shop. Because I don't think I would ever have employees, at least not my current kind of roadmap I'm on. So I can keep whatever business I have right next door. If I want to build a dedicated shop, I would like it to be on my same property as my house, right?
Yeah, totally.
So I'm totally spoiled on just basically getting up, warming up my breakfast while my spindle's warming up, and then just walking out and starting work.
Yeah. Well, and you waited for the Series 2 because it's also runs on single phase, right?
Yeah. We didn't talk about that. So, So again, there's people running the first generation Neo in their garage. I'm not the first one to do that. I don't know. I think they're, so normally a Neo runs on 400 volt 3-phase. German power standard, or the residential power standard in Germany, I should say. Everyone gets 400 volt 3-phase to their house. Isn't that heaven?
Jealous, yeah.
Yeah. So that's, all the Datron machines kind of support that standard. And so you're looking at a phase converter and a big 3-phase transformer to run that on 220 US residential power, which, that's cost, which is one thing, but it's also if you're running in a garage, it's a lot of space for that stuff.
Yeah,
right, that
space
I don't have.
And heat and all kinds of stuff.
I mean, the phase converter, even the small ones takes up, it's a pretty big unit on the wall. And the transformer was even bigger. It was a pretty big transformer that Datron sells because it's 3-phase. And then all that extra heat, right? And the amps, it draws more amps, right? Than the Datron solution, single phase solution. I don't know exactly what they're doing. It's just a little small box. Looks like a transformer. I think the deal is like the Neo actually runs on 220 single phase internally. And like they just basically set it up so you can plug it directly into 220 single phase. Or
That's
240,
awesome.
right? 230, 240, whatever you call it.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a or like a power brick, about the size of toaster.
Okay.
It goes inside one of the cabinets of the machine, and that's all the electronics for single phase are in that little box. Super simple. Like, I haven't had any problems with that. I think I was the first to install for that, at least in the US. And I kind of forget it's even there. It works.
That's awesome, though. Actually, so on the subject of machine tool purchases and why you waited for the Series 2, I'm sure that there are people listening. So you said you were looking at the office room mill or the office mill, things like that. The Datron's, as far as I know, quite a bit more expensive. How did you sway your wife with your business plan so that everybody was on board with that?
Yeah, so I actually had a 4-year ROI in my business plan for the Neo.
Okay.
And basically I think if I followed that plan, I think I would have, well, I don't know about with COVID. If COVID hadn't come along, I probably could have been successful, but that turned out, I found a faster way, right, to get to the end goal, or it found me, I should say. I didn't really go looking for it, but just got lucky, right? Found the right small set of clients that send me the right kind of work for that machine very regularly. So that I had no idea, like when I bought the machine, that that's what I'd be doing, or that, if I'd known, I definitely would have bought the machine, right? If I knew that kind of work was out there, in hindsight, just got lucky. It turned out to be the perfect work for that machine. And I'm not even sure, like my top client, like they didn't even know it. Like they didn't come looking for me because I had a Neo or a Datron. They didn't know anything about Datron. They just were looking for a machine that could, or a shop that could make molds that they were satisfied with. They were having a lot of problems, I think, their earlier previous shops, because it's kind of tough work. Like, especially if you're using a Haas or, a machine that's kind of set up with low RPM high torque spindle. It's not going to be happy running like a 0.2 millimeter in mill, right? They should be running at 100,000 RPM for fine finishing for hours and hours and hours. Yeah. So that it just got lucky. Actually, Winston's the one that sent that client to me.
Oh, wow.
So they reached out to him first. Of course, he just has the hobby machines. He has access to more fun stuff at work, but obviously it's just for work, right? It's just employer's machine. You can't do third-party work on it. But
as fast as this video is, I don't think that or the UMC would be a good fit for what you're doing.
Yeah. So Speedio, like I talked to a lot of people that are interested in the Neo or reach out to me because they want to know more about the Neo. I think like Speedio and Neo are about the same price. Like
I think they're pretty close from what I know.
Speedio's pretty close to 6 figures, right? Depending on how especially with the fourth axis.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it's faster, obviously, than the Neo. I think it's probably twice as fast. And it can do steel, like whatever. I think it's probably a more general purpose machine, even though it's still a pretty small footprint. It's a mill turn. Drill tap machine, right? So, it's kind of nichey like the Neo in that way. But you'd be surprised, right, how handy speed can be, right? To have like more than anything else. You might give it a little table travel, but having a fast machine is, to me, that's, especially coming from hobby machines, it's so much more pleasant.
Oh yeah. Well, and like I think that the Datron, the motion control is built for like the kind of work that you're doing. I mean, I watch you like surfacing that 2-color board recently, and I was like, maybe I could make the Speedio dance like that, but maybe not. And like, I'm still not sure that it would have the same kind of finish because I don't have a 40,000 RPM spindle and it's not a gantry type machine. So it's
what's that magic mode in the Speedios?
Oh,
you guys are
B2 or high speed mode. Yeah. Even with that, I would like the Datron control seems like it's incredibly powerful and very perfectly suited for the kind of work that you're putting on there.
Yeah, it's definitely, they focused a lot on, making a very dynamic machine. I think, it's fast. A lot of other machines have rapids probably that close to that fast, but I don't think Raymunium can match the acceleration and jerk that machine can pull off, without loss of accuracy. So
yeah, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So Rob at Built by Hutch had asked, when are you going to get back to making those lanyard beads?
Oh yeah, I actually made one on the Neo. That was for those folks that don't follow me. That was a part I was making on the Pocket and C for a little while, just for fun. It was kind of make them and give them away kind of thing. Wasn't a product, but I really like the one I made on like the shape I came up with on the one I was kind of the last generation that I made on the Pocket and C, but it was 5-axis part. So because it had like these holes drilled, like annular holes drilled at an odd angle to the part and to the center bore. So I was trying to like get as close as I could to that design on the Neo with the rotary axis and just soft jaws, right? So except I kind of, the mistake I made was like I started, like my very first one I made on the Neo was out of titanium, which I realized I didn't have any good tooling for titanium. The Neo, I wasn't set up for running coolant on the Neo or titanium appropriate coolant. And I didn't want to go through the process of switching because it's so the deal with the Datrons is you can switch over to, I think they call it like a fatty alcohol coolant, which is probably just, I don't know what it is exactly, but it's not flammable like the pure ethanol. And that's what you use for like steel machining. There's actually people that do like tool steel D2 on the bigger Datrons. And that's what they run. But if you unless you set up a second tank, if you switch the MQL system over to that and then want to switch back to ethanol to like machine aluminum, you have to it's a big flush process to switch them back because they're not compatible. Like you don't want them mixing in any of the plumbing, the ethanol mixing with this stuff, or you'll end up with like a kind of a jelly clogging up everything, right? And it's an expensive service call to get everything flushed out.
Oh,
so yeah. So if I ever what I'd really like to do someday is get a second tank. Or maybe just a third party MQL, right, for doing stuff like that. But as far as the lanyard bead, I'm going to go back to doing them or trying again, but with brass, like I was doing on until I get the process worked out, and then I'll move to stainless or titanium. But yeah, they're fun. I'll eventually get time and spindle time to start doing fun projects like that again.
Yeah, maybe once you pick up that second one.
Yeah, exactly.
So his other question was, how viable was your home business when it was just the smaller hobby machines?
Yeah,
Can a home shop succeed milling metal parts with only something like a Shapeoko?
Yeah, that is a very good question. And like all things, it depends. So doing what I was trying to do, job shop, would probably be the wrong approach. If, basically your material removal rate and to a lesser degree, your accuracy are not competitive with any kind of industrial, anyone that has an industrial machine. You're just not going to be able to compete with the pricing, right, and make money. But where I see people having commercial success with something like Shapeoko and metal parts is people that are making their own their own products, right? And they're not necessarily high volume. Like I think Vince Ramirez, who works for John Saunders now, Vince Fab on Instagram, he was using Shapeokos to make to support his speed shop parts. He was making like intercooler side tanks on a Shapeoko, huge parts. Like you would never believe you could pull that off on a Shapeoko, and he was doing it. And I think if you're getting enough money for the part, which is something like that, probably it's part of a bigger package of what he was selling, and he's like the only one that can make it. It's not like you just go buy that. Then yeah, it could work. Or if you're doing like even EDC stuff, the thing is if the main determinant of the cost is, or what the customer's looking for is lowest machining cost possible, that's going to be hard to compete that kind of machine. So, but where it can work for business also is prototyping, right? You can, if you have some idea or some part you're going to make, ultimately you're going to source out to a volume producer, you can always save a lot of money by making the prototypes yourself with the Shapeoko. They don't have to be perfect, but it can save you a lot of money on your isometry bill, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You can make this stuff, for a fairly small investment. And you'll also get a better understanding of when you do start dealing with, say, a big job shop to make your parts or manufacturer, you'll know the lingo and what they're dealing with a little bit better, right? Because you at least made one of the parts yourself or made one instance of yourself. So it makes you that much more educated, right?
Yeah, totally. I think that's a great way to look at it. So that wraps up the questions. Next up, shop news, new things. What's going on?
Yep. So other than air conditioner and air compressors, it's like, yeah, the Neo, like since I installed the Neo, that machine's been running great. It's all the ancillary equipment that I had problems with, right? Always seems like that. Yeah, probably. So the big thing is like COVID. I'm vaccinated now. COVID's kind of fading away, at least in the US, the restrictions. So I'm looking forward to being able to travel again. I'm hoping like Autodesk University and Fusion Academy become in-person events again, because those, like, I really miss those. Last time I went to either of those events was in 2019. I went to EMO in 2019. I missed IMTS because they canceled it. I was planning on going to that. So I'm looking forward to all that stuff starting up again. If it, I hope it doesn't stay virtual. I hope it goes back to in-person. I'm sure something like IMTS would have to.
Yeah,
so
I think the only time I've met you was at AU 2018, I want to say.
Yes. Yeah, I was there 2018. Yeah, so that's, working from home, those things become even more important, right? Because that's, I'm living a virtual life right now, as everyone has been. But for everyone else, they're going back to the office. I'm still, working from home, which makes it pretty much a virtual environment every day. So that, having that face-to-face interaction with people, I respect and learn from is something I'm looking forward to, restarting. So that's kind of what's been on my mind for this year. I'm budgeting for, whatever the first opportunity I get to go do something interesting like that, a trade show or whatever. And I think what is actually new in the shop? Really nothing much, but ask me, like, in a month, I'll have probably a pretty major infrastructure upgrade with the environmental controls and creature comforts in there.
Awesome. Yeah, I know that'll be, it's crazy like how much the heat can affect you. And I can't even imagine that kind of humidity, but like it just fries your brain. So I look forward for you to getting AC. That'll be a big upgrade.
Yeah. I mean, even like most of the work I was doing, except for the prototype, a lot of it was this long running one part running for hours and hours. So I wasn't having to spend a lot of time in that hot garage. Like, I set up a camera to remotely monitor and start the job. But, especially when I got to the finishing phase, I didn't really have to be in there. So it was it wasn't as bad as it sounds sometimes on the podcast. But like now, when I'm doing prototyping jobs, you got to be it's the first time you're running, right? You got to be watching it the whole time. I don't know how much you trust Fusion simulation, but trust but verify, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, trust but verify. I trust it to a point. And to be honest, actually, I'd say that most of the time I break tools or something like that, it's because I simulated and didn't really look at what the simulation spit out, or forgot to, simulate. I was like, I'm only changing one little thing, and then I go and run it. And I'm like, oh, well, that was the thing that broke it. So
yeah, I'm in the same. I've been in that same position. It's like the simulation was trying to tell me, and I didn't pay attention.
Yeah. I had a part last night that I was trying to get. I realized it was like a COTS part that I was modifying and then sending out, and I was just putting a chamfer on it, and I selected an edge and posted the chamfer and was like, oh, this is good. And then it cut like 200 thou too deep, and it was because I forgot to set the chamfer from the model top, and I immediately I knew immediately what I had done, and it was like, oh, well, it was a simple chamfer, so of course I didn't simulate it, and yep, that's what bit me. So every single time I don't simulate is usually when it bites me in the ass.
Yeah, I simulate everything now. Like, I've been lucky. I've never really. I had one crash. It wasn't too bad. I basically ran the 14 millimeter single flute. It was simulation wouldn't help me here, because I was doing a bunch of a stock prep, just these little blocks of Datron that I use for prototyping, like doing single cavity on the molds.
Right.
You probably see me do that in the vise. So I was trying to set up like 50 of them just to have them ready. And I was trying to face them all to be the same size. Very simple. And then I was not facing, I was actually using pocket because I wanted to remove like 1.5 millimeters. Mm-hmm. And I forgot, like, I actually had two different sizes of these kind of raw blocks. And like one of the bigger ones slipped in to my little batch I was working.
Oh no.
And so I probed once. They're all going to be the same, pretty much the same dimension. So I probed the first one. Now just switching them out in the vise and hitting cycle start, right? And then this big one was in there, and it was like 4 millimeters taller, and basically the spindle just rabbited right into that.
Oh,
yeah, didn't break anything, but it did. It was hard enough to overload the Z overload, current overload on the Z servo tripped. So,
oh boy!
but it happens. It happens so fast. You don't like. It was over by the time I was reaching for the knob because I was being cavalier, right? So that was kind of the first year you have the machine, or the first like 6 months. You're at least I am someone coming like first time using a big industrial machine or bigger than a hobby machine, right? You're super careful, and then you start to get that kind of comfortable, but not quite as competent as you think you are. You know what I'm saying? That's when the trouble happens, right? So that was a good wake up lesson. It could have been very expensive. Luckily, it was it was Delrin and not aluminum. So
yeah. I mean, even getting the brother, like I've had times where I have nearly crashed it because I've done something stupid, and thankfully I've caught it. But especially on machines that quick, the Datron, the brother, like you kind of have to have your poop in a group, because if you, I mean, there is no time. Like by the time you're hitting the E-stop or the feed hold, it's done. It's already destroyed itself. So
it moves faster than you can think, right?
Yeah. You see the crash happen in the past, kind of thing. Like it's crazy. So I totally understand and echo that sentiment. So I always wrap up every episode asking my guest, what did you research this week? And it doesn't have to be machining related. It's just whatever you've been looking for.
Yeah. So actually I was looking at, this is kind of a 3D printers. I basically, I have like one little toehold still in the additive world. I have that original 3D printer I mentioned that first got me into digital fabrication. Mm-hmm. I've never, like, that's still my 3D printer. It's a little printer bot. I think it's called Simple Metal. It was like very good printer as far as its reliability, because I keep hoping it'll die so I can buy a new one. But it's never going to die. But it's very small build area, and it's fairly slow, and it's almost 8 years old. So I finally said, it's time to update my 3D printer, because I use a lot around the shop just for making fixtures or organizing stuff in the shop. You name it, right? I don't make figurines. Like I kind of grew out of that after the first month of having it. But anyway, I just pulled the trigger on Creality Ender 5 Plus, which is their big, it's like I think it's 350 millimeter by 350 build area. So you can build something like a full-size helmet. That's giving you an idea of the build volume, or a bowling ball, right? That's kind of the build volume on this thing.
Oh, congrats.
And so I was kind of researching, kind of the must-do upgrades for that machine, and kind of the quiet drivers. I want it to be quiet. That's the other thing, because it'll be running in the house and probably running, anyone does 3D printing, that stuff can run days, right, to print something, especially a big printer like that. So it needs to be quiet overnight so it didn't disturb my wife. So I was kind of researching quiet motion boards, and, Creality sells one. So I think I'm going with that one. And
that's the same one that Winston has, right?
He has the small version of the Ender 5. Yeah. I think it's either the Pro or just the regular Ender 5. So they scaled it up basically, and changed a few, like there's actually dual Z screws on this one because it's so big. This one's like just a big cube. It's actually pretty large. I don't know if you ever saw my Shapeoko enclosure. It's like almost that big.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, not quite that tall, but it's big. But yeah, it's just the same thing. Just same as his, but scaled up like the next bigger increment, built in table size.
Well, awesome! Congrats. That should be a lot of fun.
Yeah. So that was what I was researching this week. The other thing I've kind of been more of a long-term project is looking into like diamond tools, PCD coated tooling, and recently I started playing around with the zirconium oxide ceramic tools.
Oh.
To see. Yeah, these are the same ones that Marvin, if you know Marv Grow on Instagram, works for Kern. So he was running those. They're really designed for like hogging out aluminum, like crazy material removal rates in aluminum. But basically, I think they last a long time, even though you run them like that. I don't have the kind of spindle power to run that tool in aluminum at those speeds. But what I'm interested in is the stiffness of that tool, right? I want to be able to... like on some of the mold work, I need like really small but long reach tools, and I need something that's like probably even more rigid than carbide. So try to deal with like some of the chatter and see. So I'm wondering, like, can they make a ceramic version of like the some of the long reach tools they use that'll perform a little better than the carbide? So that's kind of what I've been researching with the vendor. I think I'm going to go ahead and maybe order one of those custom tools and give it a try, and just a seedle, right, and see if it runs a little bit better without, like, I want to be able to push it a little more without chatter. See if I can kind of speed up some of the operations we do here. The long reach tools can really slow us down when I have to use them. So, they need it, right? Because you can't run those kind of tools that, like, you can run the Datron single flute without getting into trouble.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Those can't be cheap though.
No, but they, and especially in the seedle, they'll last forever unless I break it, do something stupid. They're basically, I just need to buy one, or of course two, right. Or three minimum, I think is what if I want custom tooling, but they're pretty, it's almost, if they work well, they'll actually pay for themselves and faster, basically job turnaround. Because that, when I have to use those tools, it can add hours and hours to one of these jobs. So,
and what size are you going to get?
Probably, I'm looking at like 0.4 millimeter up to 1 millimeter, and like 10x, between 8x and 10x reach.
Oh boy!
Yeah, okay, on the size, yeah.
that makes more sense. That sounds rough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would not want to be running a 10 millimeter long 1 millimeter end mill. I mean, I've definitely...
Yeah, most of these are for finishing, but I don't say it. I mean, there's so little material removal with the small tools. Even what's roughing is finishing. I don't know if you know what I mean. Yeah, we'll see. I'm hoping that'll help. Right now, we just kind of have some design rules to help avoid building or designing that kind of geometry, but it's constraining on some of the stuff they want to do on the creative side of with the mold design. So if I can accommodate it, in a cost-effective way, and that might be through tooling, right? So that's one of the big advances, right, in manufacturing has been tooling and material science and tooling. So I'm learning a lot from Marvin. Mostly not like, he's really good at telling me what not to do, like saves me from wasting a lot of money most of the time. Because he knows my machine. He's very familiar with the Neo and what it can do and what it can't do. And it's like, I'll see him do something on the Kern. It's like, oh, I want to do that. And I say, well, buy a Kern.
That's mean. Oh, goodness.
Yeah, those are amazing machines. But
yeah, well, and he does have really good experience with both. So
yeah.
Well, awesome. That is super cool. Well, thank you so much, Ed. I really appreciate you coming on. In closing, thank you to all our Patreon sponsors. Again, if you want to support the Within Tolerance podcast, it's patreon.com/Within Tolerance podcast. Thanks everyone who supports the podcast. Thanks, Ed, for coming on and taking the time. I really appreciate it. And it was great to get to talk to you.
You too, Dylan. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
My pleasure. And thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you next week.